I know that there are sort of a lot of changes underway at the IMC. First and foremost, you want to be more coherent and you don't want to be called the IMC, you want to be called Brand SA because it just goes to the nub of the issue. What other changes are underway?
Good evening, Lorato. Certainly, the issue of the name change is something that was raised in a meeting between the council as well as the president last week. And the idea there is that the International Marketing Council name tended to focus on our international efforts only. Whereas in 2008, we went through a review process, which actually indicated that we need to also focus on mobilizing South Africans and making them brand ambassadors, ensuring that they can be confident spokespersons of the country, but can also talk the country up, hence the name change.
All right, now these stakeholder summits that began in Johannesburg today, what's that all about? Because essentially what you're trying to do is get a range of South Africans, policymakers, business, civil society, to start to really be part of this new impetus for a new kind of message.
Yeah. Well, in order to ensure a consistent and coherent message in our marketing efforts internationally, we need all the stakeholders to work together. So we need business, we need government, as well as the civil society to work together. And within that is obviously the media as well. So it is imperative that we consult with them, we talk to them. Today's event was really about sharing our plans with them and saying this is what we are doing, and also getting feedback from stakeholders, but more importantly, exhorting them to really become brand ambassadors and join in the effort to promote and profile South Africa.
One of the issues that came up is whether or not this kind of energy needs to be stimulated through a series of workshops, or whether it's the day-to-day interactions that all South Africans have. And that's a challenge, because how do we gauge and measure whether all South Africans are singing from the same hymn sheet?
Well, essentially it shouldn't be, event-driven, workshop-driven, for instance, but it should be something that we live throughout our everyday lives. It should be something that is embedded in our activities, whether we are a business or whether we are civil society. And our intent is obviously to get to the point where South Africans can actually live those values of the brand and can actually demonstrate that they have a very strong affinity to this country and therefore can be able to talk very positively about it.
Okay, talk us through those values.
Well, some of these values go to issues such as Ubuntu, which is one of those central values, and you can find it across the rest of Africa. And it's much more than just the issue of humaneness. It's really a strong recognition of that fact that your humanity is interlinked with mine, and therefore it goes just beyond a very narrow definition. We also have sustainability, because we believe that South Africa has demonstrated very strongly that it is a sustainable democracy amongst other things, but also sustainability in terms of investing in its future. If you look at the infrastructure investments we are making, for an example, the other value that we look at is possibility. As I say, South Africans see no cul-de-sacs. For South Africans, everything is possible. So if you look at a few things, if you ask people a few years ago where South Africa would be, I don't think many would actually imagine that we would be where we are.
Do you think that, I think South Africans are generally proud of the country and the journey we've traveled post-apartheid, but do you think South Africans quantify or really have calibrated those gains in terms of how they see themselves? And I'm talking here about, if you look at Americans and how patriotic they are, where people have flags outside their homes, where people before sporting events sing national anthems and know the words of the national anthem. Do you think South Africans are that way inclined?
I think we are growing in that direction, but we still have a lot of work to do, where such impulses become a natural thing and are not driven really by either an event or an external reality. I think our ambition and vision is to get to a point where patriotic pride and a sense of unity and belonging is core to what all South Africans are about. And this goes a long way in terms of, someone said earlier today, you've got to catch them younger. So start with the young people and actually educate them to have a sense of pride in this country and realize that the strides that have been made in this country. Yeah.
A lot of this obviously is about the positive imaging of South Africa and making it competitive, especially now that we've got, we're fighting for tourism market share, investment market share with India, China, Brazil, and the like. The question is, does being patriotic and proud mean brushing under the carpet some of the real challenges of living in South Africa? Issues around poverty, for instance, issues around unemployment, and some of those sorts of challenges, crime.
By no means, not at all. In fact, what we need to get to a point is where we really engage these issues, we talk about them. From the Brand South Africa side, Our role is to ensure that we understand how we are gauged throughout the world. For example, some of the indices that we track, we should be able to come back and say, here are the areas where we need to improve, and here are the areas that we need to do well. But I think what's important from our end is that you need to talk about the positives that are happening, because you rightly said earlier, South Africans might not have a great appreciation of what has been achieved in this country and actually where this country is going. So it is important that we actually highlight that. A simple issue is, this country, for example, with the global changes taking place, with us joining the BRICS, and with the recent democratic elections, municipal elections, it shows you that this is a democracy at work, and this is a country that's marching forward.
The role of business in this entire campaign. I mean, obviously we want tangible results by way of business investing, expanding in the economy, creating jobs. But we also have a lot of South African businesses that are starting to invest into the rest of Africa. And there's a sense that they should also be brand ambassadors. Why should they?
Well, it's important for businesses to be brand ambassadors because, for example, South African businesses spreading out and expanding into the rest of the continent or wherever, it's in their interest that South Africa has a very strong and positive brand reputation, but also that South Africa becomes competitive, because it is only when, as an economy, we are competitive that the firms that operate within that economy can also be competitive. So it's in their best interest to do that.
The role of the media is often lambasted as being the very people who talk South Africa down.
Well, as I said earlier, the media has a very important role to play as well. And this role is not just reduced to them reporting what other people believe they should report. It's a role that involves being very objective, but understanding the broader nation building and nation brand reputation building process that is at work here. And what we are saying is they have a critical role and can play a very critical role in ensuring that the country, the rest of the continent, get to where they should.
Finally and very briefly, brand South Africa, a nation brand versus a continental brand. That's also very important, because a lot of what happens on the continent almost reaffirms or undermines what South Africa says it represents, and vice versa.
Most certainly. If you think of how the continent was seen in the not so distant past, not as a country or a continent with 53 countries in it, but just as a homogeneous entity, that tends to have a negative impact on the individual countries, and most of which are actually making very significant strides in terms of reform, in terms of structural changes, in terms of democracy. So yes, it is important that we differentiate and we actually ensure that each of the individual countries, as they progress, as they make strides and achievement, these things should be talked about. These stories should be told. And it is only in that way that we can actually combat the issue of pessimism.